In the early 1990s, one of Hollywood's biggest action stars pestered a U.S. defense contractor to sell him a truck the American military had famously used in a war with Iraq. And so, America got the Hummer. The angular, militaristic, go-anywhere truck became an emblem of 1990s pop culture, a coveted status symbol sought by celebrities, and a sometimes mocked and vilified example of just how far America's newfound love for sport utility vehicles had gone. The Hummer was huge, brash, and often brightly colored, and it became a favorite choice for adventurous buyers who didn't mind attracting attention. And then, it was gone, as parent company General Motors collapsed into bankruptcy.
I would say there probably isn't many more iconic vehicles of this century than the Hummer. I would put like the Hummer, the Prius, the Beetle. I would say they all existed for a time and were so incredibly popular, and that popularity has faded for all of them. But I mean, Hummer was so ubiquitous at one point in terms of representing that overly emasculated, aggressive, almost stereotype.
The Hummer had a brief life, spanning just under 2 decades, but it made a lasting impression. The vehicle that would come to be called a Hummer actually began as the U.S. military's high-mobility, multi-purpose wheeled vehicle. The name's cumbersome acronym, HMMWV, landed the truck with its nickname, Humvee. It was first developed in 1981 by U.S. defense contractor AM General. It was most notably used in the First Gulf War, but the kind seen on roads and highways later on came about because, as the story goes, Arnold Schwarzenegger saw a convoy of Hummers in Oregon while filming a movie and decided he had to have one. Upon seeing them, he would later say he could see himself driving the vehicle in the mountains and in the desert. Schwarzenegger reportedly lobbied AM General repeatedly for one of the vehicles. At first, he demanded one of the same Humvees the company had sold to the military, but he was refused, since the truck was not street legal. Then he began asking AM General to make a civilian version. He even flew out to the company's headquarters in South Bend, Indiana, to make his case. The contractor eventually created a civilian version in 1992 and named it the Hummer. Schwarzenegger was there for the unveiling of the vehicle and drove one of the first specimens off the assembly line. By many measurements, the Hummer outdid every other passenger vehicle on the market. It had a full 16 inches of ground clearance. That's over 9 inches more than the Jeep Wrangler Rubicon. It was also 7 feet wide, almost as wide as the biggest street-legal semi-trucks, making it stable and resistant to rollover despite its height. The civilian version came with a more comfortable cabin geared for cruising and commuting rather than combat, but the truck did retain some of the features found on the original version.
This was a vehicle that was extremely capable of going anywhere off-road. So even if most owners never actually took it off the pavement, the vehicle did have the credibility behind it. The owners of the vehicle knew that it could go really far off-road if they so desired, and the capability of that vehicle was part of its credibility.
And the Hummer was a success for a while. GM bought the brand in 1999 and expanded the lineup with progressively smaller models, called the H2 and H3.
By 2002, General Motors was launching the Hummer brand in a big way with the H2, which was a smaller version of the smaller, more consumer-friendly version of the H1 that was heavily based on GM pickup, heavy-duty pickup mechanicals. And the timing of it was sort of fortuitous for General Motors because the second Gulf War was starting, and all over the news, all you saw were military Humvees, storming into Iraq. And right about that time, General Motors launched the H2. So it was able to capitalize on current events of the time. It also made it a very polarizing vehicle because Americans were either in support of the war or they were really, really against it.
Eventually, every celebrity seemed to have one. Schwarzenegger himself owned at least 7 at one point. Heavyweight boxer Mike Tyson had 6. At its peak in 2006, Americans bought more than 71,000 Hummers. The vehicle was an oddity in the marketplace. Huge, blunt, and aggressive. But that appears to be part of what people liked about it.
It was a vehicle that absolutely could not be ignored. I think the fact that there were so many of them that were painted in bright yellow sort of spoke volumes about the fact that this was a vehicle that people really wanted to be seen in. I mean, people generally chose pretty extroverted colors to go with this vehicle. The vehicle was, of course, extremely off-road capable, but there were a relatively small number of people who actually used it for that purpose. Really, it was a fashion statement. For some people, it was even a political statement. And most of all, it was a vehicle that, for those who were really into the product, it was something that they really wanted to show off and be seen in.
However, there was also backlash against the truck, which critics viewed as an obnoxious gas guzzler. The original Hummer H1 got about 10 miles per gallon. The smallest of the lineup, the H3, got 14 miles per gallon with an automatic transmission in the 2010 model year. To activists and other critics, the vehicle became a symbol of excess and the American addiction to fuel at a time when prices were beginning to climb and the country was fighting wars in the oil-rich Middle East. In one high-profile case, a dealership in West Covina, California was vandalized, including 20 Hummers valued at about $50,000 each. The perpetrators spray-painted messages on several of the damaged trucks, including "Gross Polluter" and "Fat, Lazy Americans." Apart from the environmental backlash, rising fuel prices and a grueling recession spoiled America's taste for big vehicles. Hummer sales fell from their 2006 high to 55,986 in 2007, 27,485 in 2008, and just 9,046 in 2009. Unfortunately
for Hummer, as the decade progressed, fuel prices went haywire around 2008. All of a sudden, it made the Hummer look very unfashionable because here was a vehicle that got maybe 10 miles a gallon when gas prices were shooting up, to near about $4 a gallon across the country. And all of a sudden, it looked very out of step with the times, and it looked like a dinosaur, and sales fell off like a rock. Hummer did introduce a smaller model called the H3, but by that time, I think the damage was pretty much already done.
To make matters worse, General Motors itself had collapsed. The largest U.S. automaker filed for bankruptcy in 2009. GM put several of its brands to the axe, including Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Saab, and Hummer.
So I think for those times when General Motors was looking at what they should do as they were going through bankruptcy moving forward, Hummer was a brand that they had to unload. I mean, even if you look at what their pickup truck sales were at the time, those had just fallen off the cliff as well. So it was clear that Americans were not interested in these larger vehicles.
All of the things that had made it appealing, its big, loud, brash attitude, were now liabilities. GM would later try to sell the brand to Chinese investors, but that deal fell through. The strange thing is that as prices have fallen from an all-time high set in 2008, and as the US has pulled out of the recession, customers have run back to sport utilities and trucks.
Fast forward to today, and now all those smaller, not Hummer size SUVs are nearing 50% of new car sales in the United States. So what's old is new again, essentially. I think that's the add-in for almost everything. But it seems like it certainly is the case here with Hummer as well.
But it is possible the brand could have a second life. At least 2 reports have said GM is considering bringing the Hummer back as part of a fleet of electric and hybrid sport utilities and trucks. GM had no comment on reports it plans to bring back the Hummer. But a move like that would allow the automaker to capitalize on the Hummer's military pedigree and adventurous image while keeping in step with what GM CEO Mary Barra calls GM's all-electric future. Over the years, even Schwarzenegger has been seen piloting Hummers running on alternative fuels.
One of my Hummers has been turned into a hydrogen Hummer, And that, of course, emits no greenhouse gases at all. And the other Hummer has been turned into a biofuel Hummer, and that one now emits 40 to 50% less greenhouse gases. So I think those are the kind of initiatives each individual of us can take.
Reviving the Hummer could also be a relatively inexpensive way for GM to broaden its truck lineup at a time when Americans are scooping up pickups and sport utilities at an unprecedented rate. Several industry watchers have said the shift toward utilities and trucks in the new car market is here to stay. If that is true, automakers are likely to keep trying to carve out new niches to distinguish themselves and squeeze higher margins out of each purchase. Big, butch, off-road ready vehicles are once again the order of the day. The longtime off-road favorite Jeep Wrangler has climbed from 84,615 units in 2008 to 240,032 units in 2018. And Jeep added the Gladiator pickup truck to its Wrangler lineup for the 2019 model year. While GM has off-road capable vehicles, it doesn't really have one that directly replaced the Hummer, nor one that could directly compete with the Wrangler. Having a dedicated off-road oriented brand could be a boon to GM in its ongoing war for truck and SUV dominance with its Detroit rivals.
So I think that it does make sense from a manufacturer standpoint, but also it seems like the consumer base is there. I mean, how much hype was there around the Jeep Gladiator launch? I mean, tons. I mean, people are, still very excited about that vehicle, a year later.
The Gladiator is actually a revival of a pickup truck Jeep sold in the 1960s. In similar manner, Ford plans to revive the Bronco, another once popular utility vehicle. Toyota brought back its Supra sports car. Honda pulled the Passport name out of its archives for a new sport utility. When automakers reintroduce brands, they can take advantage of nostalgia, while also saving money they would have to spend introducing customers to a totally new product. Even a brand as notorious as Hummer is still a recognized one. The Hummer was certainly a polarizing vehicle, but reviving it in this market is starting to look like a smart bet.